Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a real paradox, a country sitting on the world's biggest pile of oil, yet it's on the verge of total collapse. And believe me, this story matters a lot more to your energy security than you might think.
So you've probably heard this before, right? Every time things get tense in the Middle East, someone asks the question, hey, what about Venezuela? It's right next door. Could it solve our energy problems? And look, it's a huge question, one that could totally reshape global energy, politics, the whole shebang.
All right, let's just get it out of the way. The short answer is a hard no. But, and this is a big but, you're going to want to stick around. Because why the answer is no, well, that's where things get really interesting. It opens up a whole new way of looking at our energy strategy.
Okay, to really get this, we need to talk about something called energy security. And it's not as complicated as it sounds. Think about it like this. You wouldn't want your entire paycheck coming from just one risky client, right? You'd want a few different sources of income. That's exactly what energy security is for a country, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
So, check this out. 27%. That's how much of the world's oil that's shipped by sea has to squeeze through one tiny choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. That is a massive bottleneck. It's like if nearly a third of all the traffic in your country had to go over a single rickety bridge every day. That is a huge vulnerability.
Okay, so keeping that huge vulnerability in mind, let's pivot back to Venezuela, because this is where we see this incredible contrast between what could be and, well, what actually is.
Just look at this number, 303 billion barrels. That's what Venezuela has in proven oil reserves. It is, without a doubt, the largest stash of oil on planet Earth. On paper, these guys should be an absolute energy titan.
But then you see this, and wow, this is the brutal reality. All that potential means nothing if you can't get it out of the ground. Their production has just fallen off a cliff. I mean, they went from producing almost 4 million barrels a day to, well, a tiny fraction of that. Today, they're barely a blip on the radar, making up only about 1% of the world's supply. All that black gold is just stuck down there.
So how on earth did this happen? Well, it wasn't one thing. It was more like a slow-motion train wreck, a perfect storm of not spending money on upkeep, massive government mismanagement, and all the smart, qualified engineers just leaving the country. And get this, all of that rot was setting in long before the really tough international sanctions kicked in. The sanctions just poured gasoline on the fire.
Okay, but here's the twist in the story. Despite the absolute mess we just talked about, Venezuelan oil is kinda, well, a perfect match for the United States.
Just think about the geography for a second. Getting oil from the Middle East takes weeks, and it has to go through that very risky Strait of Hormuz we mentioned. Getting that same oil from Venezuela to our refineries on the Gulf Coast, that takes just a few days. You're basically swapping a long, dangerous commute for a short, simple one right in your own backyard.
And it gets even better when you look at the technical side. It's like a lock and key. See those super advanced refineries we have on the Gulf Coast? They were literally built to handle a specific type of oil, heavy, sour crude. And guess what Venezuela has more of than anyone? Exactly that. In fact, a lot of the lighter oil we produce here in the US isn't even the right type for these specialized plants.
So this is where we get to the heart of the problem, the big paradox. We have this perfect match, right? Geographically, technically, it all fits, but it's being completely blocked by a massive policy contradiction. To even begin to fix Venezuela's oil industry, we're talking about an insane amount of cash. A conservative guess is something like $15 to $20 billion just to get a small portion of their old production back. To put that number in perspective, that's more money than the entire economy of some countries. And that's just a down payment on the repairs.
So you have to be asking yourself, right? If it's such a great fit and so good for our energy security, what's stopping that money from flowing in and getting things fixed?
Well, it really boils down to the law of unintended consequences. The U.S. policy was called maximum pressure. The idea was to squeeze the regime financially by cutting off its access to Western money. But here's what happened instead. With no money for repairs, the industry crumbled even faster. So Venezuela had to look for new friends, and it found them in places like China and Iran. The very policy meant to isolate them actually pushed them right into the arms of U.S. adversaries.
And look, the experts are pretty clear on this. As the Atlantic Council pointed out, the maximum pressure strategy just didn't work. It didn't achieve its political goals. And what's worse, it actually hurt American energy security. From an energy standpoint, it's a classic case of the treatment being worse than the disease.
All right, this is the most important part. We need to completely reframe how we think about this.
The goal was never to just swap out Middle Eastern oil for Venezuelan oil. That's thinking too small. No, the real prize here isn't replacement, it's diversification. That's the key word. It's about building a smarter, stronger supply chain that isn't so easily knocked over by a crisis happening thousands of miles away. You know, if we get this right, it could lead to this incredible strategic concept called Fortress Americas. Just imagine it, an energy market that links the US, Canada, and a rebuilt Venezuela. We'd go from constantly reacting to global crises to proactively managing a stable energy zone right here in our own hemisphere. That's a total game changer.
So how do we get there? It would take a real shift in policy, moving from maximum pressure to something more like smart engagement. That means offering stable, long-term deals that make those big investors feel safe putting their billions on the line. The endgame is to bring Venezuela back into the fold, strengthen our neighborhood, and finally, reduce our dependence on those risky choke points overseas.
Which leaves us with one big final question. And it's not really about oil, is it? It's about strategy. Is the U.S. going to stick with a pressure campaign that hasn't really worked? Or will it pivot to a more pragmatic approach, one that could build a much safer energy future for all of us right here at home?